Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Abundant Wellness Podcast. Today, I'm going to be talking to you about mothering in perimenopause and why this hits us so hard as parents of neurospicy children. Regardless of your child's diagnosis, we have to understand that carrying the invisible load that you have been carrying for so long impacts our stress responses, leading to depletion. And this is well-studied, well-researched data. And honestly, I don't even think we need the data to validate that, because I'm sure that your level of tired, your level of exhaustion is the proof, right? That this stress has impacted you differently. And I want you to think about it this way. When you are parenting a neurotypical child, you go through seasons of stress, right? When they're a newborn and they're waking up multiple times a night and you're not getting good sleep, and then toddlerhood when it's tantrums and behavior things that creep up. But in the back of our minds, we're thinking like, oh, there will be relief soon. We're growing out of this. When we have a child that is not neurotypical, or in my child's case has a complex medical diagnosis, traumatic brain injury that led to these different things, we don't get that relief. That relief doesn't come to us because we don't actually know how long it's going to take before our child gets better. And I know that I've shared this on other episodes before, that the number one belief that trips us up is actually the thought process that I will take care of myself once my child is better. But that ends up tripping us up and actually causing more harm than we honestly could even imagine, because we don't realize how long it's going to take for our child to get better. And then all of a sudden, all of our life choices are contingent upon how well our child is doing that day. When what we need to realize is that there are multiple moving parts here, and that our child's mental health, their mental stability, their nervous system is constantly pulling on yours. And sometimes their nervous system instability is actually holding up a mirror to your own. And I know that that can feel really hard to hear, because it can feel like a guilt thing, right? Or a shame thing. I want to be clear what I'm not saying. I'm not saying that your child's behavior is your fault. I'm not saying that their meltdowns are the cause of you or anything like that. I'm simply saying that we cannot expect them to heal beyond the level of which we are healed, because that's not how these relationships work. That's not how neurology works. And so many of us as parents, as women especially, don't recognize that we are in some level of burnout until we're also hitting perimenopause. And there are some physiologic reasons for why this happens. This happens because the hormonal buffers that have been in place our entire life are no longer there, because again, those start to bottom out around the age of 35 and taper off, as we get into our mid-40s. Now, what makes that different for us as parents of special needs children is the chronic stress that we're carrying, the invisible load that we're carrying, which I've talked about and line itemed that out in other episodes, so I won't bore you to death with that today. But getting into the nitty-gritty of this, our stress responses are higher, which means that our risk for microbiome issues, bacterial imbalances, chronic cortisol dysregulation is much, much higher, and our nutrient absorption goes down because of all of those things, which then impacts the hormones. So we might be blaming perimenopause on a bigger systemic problem, because hormones are a tertiary symptom. They are a tertiary problem, not a primary problem, meaning that they are responding to everything else that's going on in our world. And so when we think about raising a child with a complex medical diagnosis, a neurobehavioral diagnosis like ADHD, autism, anxiety, ODD, PDA, those cause chronic stress responses in the body. And then we do end up in this place of depletion, which is not a fun place to be. And so now we've got to figure out, how are we going to move through this? And so I want to offer a perspective shift for you. And hopefully, maybe you'll learn from my mistakes of waiting too long and part of that was because I thought that doing what works for neurotypical moms would be enough for my nervous system. And the reality is that it absolutely is not. And part of the reason for that is because if you think about it, the physiologic demand is so much higher for those of us raising children with special needs. And I know that I'm creating kind of a broad category with that. But that being said, because of the aggressive nature of our children's disabilities or their diagnosis, our lifestyle should be as aggressive. Our lifestyle for balancing our nervous system, for regulating our emotions, for getting our microbiome under control has to match the intensity that is coming in at us. What do I mean by that? We have to be radically aggressive at regulating those things in our life. Otherwise, we'll end up in midlife, mid-40s, completely bottomed out if we're not already there currently. And so what does it look like to be radically aggressive? It does require looking at some things differently. I know for me, it looked like, some very deeply entrenched beliefs that I couldn't invest in myself until my daughter was better, that I couldn't invest in my own healing until, she was better. Now, there were financial reasons for that as well. We were spending inordinate amounts of money trying to get her recovered. Her diagnosis was severe and required, pretty immediate and severe action on our part. Now, so there was the reality that I did have limited finances at the time. I'm not suggesting that any of us have an unlimited budget to work on these things. But what I typically see happening when I'm working with moms, and this is absolutely true of myself, we're not even prioritizing the basic things. Like if you look at the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which I have a whole training on this in the Thriving Together community, if you're wanting to figure out where you're at, where you land in the nervous system dysregulation categories, how to support yourself, I highly recommend you joining that community. It is linked in the show notes for you. But if you look just at the basics of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we have foundational needs that everything else is then built upon. So we have the need for sleep, we have the need for safety, we have the need for food and water. Those are our basic primary needs. And when I really dig into this for moms of special needs kids, moms of kids with chronic diagnoses, none of those needs are being met. Either their child is waking up multiple times a night, or they don't feel like they can ask their partner to help with their child that's waking up in the middle of the night. Or in our case, our child was sleeping through the night, but my nervous system was so dysregulated that I was no longer sleeping. And I knew on some conscious level that would eventually impact me, but I didn't realize how aggressive and protective I needed to be around those sleep issues. And so for many of us, we're not even prioritizing those things. We're not prioritizing having an uninterrupted meal. Now, I know that sometimes that's not possible, but what I found for myself was that, I'll just give you an example of this. Oftentimes, meals were meltdown times for my daughter. Her brain was so inflamed that she just could not regulate herself. And so I would sit down to eat after I had fed her, and eventually she would be having a meltdown about something. Either it wasn't the right amount of food or the right type of food, or she wanted to go do something else. And then my mealtime would be interrupted. Well, because I was so stressed out and my nervous system was so dysregulated, I would do anything to get her out of those meltdowns so that I didn't have to deal with the stress of them. Okay, let's be real. What I realized, though, was that was causing issues with my digestion, that was causing issues with my nervous system, and I was not getting the nutrients that my body actually needed to stay well. So one of the pivots that I had to make was to let her have a meltdown. Now, she was old enough that she was not causing harm to herself or other people, and so if she was screaming, yelling, whatever, I would take her little sister and we would go in the backyard and I would eat. Or I would have her go to her room and we would eat so that I could have an uninterrupted meal. It's little things like that that don't feel like they're making a huge difference in the moment, but cumulatively, they have a huge impact, because what I see is the moms that are prioritizing that are taking their health seriously, that are recognizing, I'm not going to get my child through this if I am not okay. They are the ones who thrive at the end. The ones that flounder like I did are the ones that didn't figure out how to make those changes and how to get on top of the needs that were being presented, okay? So that's just one strategy that we're talking about in terms of supporting, getting our health on track, and making sure that we are being radically aggressive. The other things are the things kind of outside of those foundational things like sleep and, having uninterrupted meal times and going for walks and things like that. It's also prioritizing the same therapies that your child needs, are the same needs that you have. And so I think this is also recognizing that this journey is deeply traumatic for us as parents. And so we have to start being radically aggressive and saying, hey, I'm going to portion out some of those funds for myself, whether that looks like, going to therapy once a month. I've talked about this, or going to a chiropractor once a month, something that you can do that regulates your nervous system, because you recognize that your child's health and future progress depends on you being well. That means that we have to shift our mindset about how we're parenting through these things. Some things that I have found to be extremely helpful for parents who are going through this. One, starting that work on nervous system regulation. I have tons of trainings in the Thriving Together community on how to do that from your home, that are virtually no cost to you at all. Those trainings are under the free section in the Thriving Together community that you can access at any time. But some things peripheral to that would be like finding a licensed counselor that you can just go and have a space to talk about whatever you need. That might look like EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization reprocessing, which is a trauma reprocessing protocol. Neurofeedback can be incredibly helpful for regulating the nervous system. And we don't have to do all of these things at once, but what I like to do is I like to pull back, every season, every 3 months or so, evaluate what are the needs of my family, and then checking in with myself, because I recognize now that I cannot meet any of the needs of my family if my needs aren't met, at least in part, if not in whole. And so evaluating, okay, if I have to do a therapy intensive for my child that's going to require that I am at therapy 3 hours a day, 5 times a week for 3 weeks, then what is it that I need to be pouring into myself to make that happen? What conversations do I need to have with my spouse, my partner, my in-laws, to help facilitate that? Those are really, really important conversations to have. And it feels radical, but the thing that I want you to really chew on, I know today is kind of a shorter episode, but I did that intentionally because it's really something that we just need to take action on. It's not something we need more information on necessarily. It's something we just need to take action on. And so that being said, when you start to take action, when you start to do the thing that you need to do, it's going to feel like a little bit of a war within yourself because you have those mindsets and beliefs that are keeping you stuck. But once you do the evaluation of, okay, these are my family's needs. Now, how can I portion just a little bit of this for myself? What conversations do I need to have with my partner? Who needs to help me so that I can help my child? And start just taking one step at a time, because the reality is your needs are not a luxury. They are a need. They are a requirement for life. And many of us look at them as a luxury, like someday when I'm wealthy, I'll be able to do that. Or someday when, my child is well, I'll be able to do that. When really we should not be thinking about these things as a luxury, but a necessity. If you want more support and information on how to thrive while raising a child that is neurospicy, I would invite you to join the Thriving Together community today for more resources, not only for you, but for your entire family. And thanks so much for listening.